The encounter. The ship shuddered violently as the alarms blared, red lights flashing across the cockpit. Cale gripped the controls, his knuckles white, as the warning system screamed about critical damage. "Come on, hold together," he muttered, his voice tense. The planet below was a swirling mass of greens and blues, beautiful but deadly. He had heard stories about Zorath, a forbidden world, home to the enigmatic Zorathians, a species known for their strength and telepathic abilities. But now, with his engines failing, he had no choice but to land. The ship broke through the atmosphere, heat shields glowing as it descended. Cale's heart pounded in his chest. He had faced countless dangers in his years as a space explorer, but this felt different. The stories about Zorath were filled with warnings: stay away, or you'll never return. But as the ground rushed up to meet him, he pushed those thoughts aside. Survival was all that mattered. The crash landing was rough. The ship skidded across the terrain, tearing through the dense jungle before finally coming to a stop. Cale groaned, his body aching from the impact. He unbuckled himself and grabbed his survival kit, his mind racing. He needed to assess the damage and find a way to call for help. But first, he had to make sure the area was safe. As he stepped out of the ship, the air hit him, thick, humid, and filled with the scent of alien flora. The jungle was alive with strange sounds, chirps, growls, and the rustling of leaves. Cale activated his wrist scanner, checking for life signs. The readings were erratic, showing movement all around him. He tightened his grip on his blaster and moved cautiously through the undergrowth. It wasn't long before he realized he wasn't alone. A low growl echoed through the trees, and Cale froze. His scanner picked up a large heat signature moving toward him. He raised his blaster, his eyes scanning the shadows. Then, it emerged, a massive, six-legged predator with glowing eyes and razor-sharp claws. Cale's breath caught in his throat. He had faced dangerous creatures before, but this one was unlike anything he had ever seen. The creature lunged, and Cale fired, but his shots barely seemed to slow it down. He dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding its claws. He fired again, but the creature was too fast. Just as it was about to pounce, a flash of movement caught his eye. Something, or someone, slammed into the creature, sending it sprawling. Cale stared in shock as the figure stood over the predator, a glowing blade in hand. It was a woman, but unlike any he had ever seen. Her skin was a deep, shimmering blue, and her hair flowed like liquid silver. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her body was lean and muscular, radiating strength and grace. She moved with a fluidity that was almost hypnotic, her blade slicing through the air with precision. The creature roared, but she was faster. With a final, decisive strike, she ended its life. Then, she turned to Cale, her glowing eyes locking onto his. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the jungle silent around them. Cale's heart raced, not just from the danger, but from the intensity of her gaze. She was beautiful, but also terrifying. "You're not supposed to be here," she said, her voice low and melodic, yet filled with authority. "This planet is forbidden to outsiders." Cale swallowed hard, lowering his blaster. "I didn't have a choice. My ship was damaged, and I had to land. I mean no harm." She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she sheathed her blade and stepped closer. "You're lucky I found you. The jungle is no place for someone like you." "Someone like me?" Cale asked, raising an eyebrow. "A human," she replied simply. "Weak, fragile, and unprepared for the dangers of Zorath." Cale bristled at her words, but he couldn't deny the truth in them. He had barely survived his encounter with the predator, and she had taken it down with ease. "I'm Cale," he said, extending a hand. "And you are?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Sinara. And you're coming with me. It's not safe here." Cale nodded, though he wasn't sure if he could trust her. But with his ship destroyed and no way to call for help, he didn't have many options. As they moved through the jungle, he couldn't help but notice the way she moved, like a predator, but also like a dancer. There was something mesmerizing about her, something that drew him in despite the danger. As they walked, Zenara glanced back at him. "You're different from the others," she said, her voice softer now. "Most humans would be trembling in fear after what just happened. But you're calm." Kale shrugged. "I've been in tough situations before." "You learn to keep your cool." Zenara's lips curved into a faint smile. "Interesting. Perhaps there's more to you than meets the eye." Kale felt a shiver run down his spine. There was something in her tone, something that made his heart race. But before he could respond, she stopped and held up a hand. "We're here," she said. They had reached a clearing, and in the center stood a small, hidden structure. It was made of the same shimmering material as Zenara's blade, blending seamlessly with the jungle. "This is my sanctuary," she explained. "You'll be safe here, for now." Kale followed her inside, his mind racing with questions. Who was she? Why had she saved him? And what did she want from him? But as he looked at her, he couldn't help but feel a strange connection, as if they were meant to meet. Little did he know, their encounter was just the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. The Forbidden Bond. The sanctuary was unlike anything Kale had ever seen. The walls shimmered with a soft, iridescent glow, and the air was filled with a faint, sweet scent. It felt alive, as if the structure itself was breathing. Zenara moved through the space with ease, her every step graceful and deliberate. Kale followed, his eyes darting around, taking in the strange beauty of the place. "This is incredible," he said, his voice filled with awe. "How did you build this?" Zenara glanced at him, her glowing eyes softening. "It's not built. It's grown. My people have a deep connection to the energy of this planet. We shape it, mold it, but we do not destroy it." Kale nodded, though he didn't fully understand. He reached out to touch the wall, and it felt warm, almost like skin. He pulled his hand back, startled. "It's alive?" "In a way," Zenara replied. "Everything on Zorith is connected. The trees, the animals, even the air you breathe. It's all part of a greater whole." Kale took a deep breath, trying to process what she was saying. It was so different from anything he had ever experienced. On Earth, and even on the colonies, life was about survival, about conquering the environment. But here, it was about harmony, about balance. Zenara led him to a small chamber, where a pool of crystal-clear water shimmered under the soft light. "You should clean your wounds," she said, gesturing to the pool. "The water has healing properties." Kale hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He stripped off his torn and bloodied shirt, revealing the cuts and bruises he had sustained during the crash. He stepped into the pool, the water cool and soothing against his skin. As he washed, he couldn't help but notice Zenara watching him, her gaze intense and unreadable. "Why did you save me?" he asked, breaking the silence. "You said this planet is forbidden to outsiders. Why risk it?" Zenara's expression softened, and she sat down at the edge of the pool, her legs dangling in the water. "I felt something when I saw you," she admitted. "A connection, a pull. I couldn't just let you die." Kale looked at her, his heart racing. There was something in her voice, something that made his chest tighten. "A connection," he repeated. "What do you mean?" Zenara hesitated, her glowing eyes searching his. "My people are telepathic," she explained. "We can sense emotions, thoughts, even memories. When I saw you, I felt something different. Something I've never felt before." Kale's breath caught in his throat. He had heard stories about the Zorathians, about their abilities, but he had never imagined he would experience it firsthand. "What did you feel?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zenara leaned closer, her face just inches from his. I felt your strength, your determination. But I also felt your loneliness, your longing. It's like, you're searching for something, but you don't know what it is. Kale's heart pounded in his chest. She was right. He had always felt like something was missing, like there was a void in his life that he couldn't fill. But he had never been able to put it into words. How do you know that? He asked, his voice trembling. Because I feel it too, Zenara whispered. I've spent my entire life following the rules, living by the code of my people. But deep down, I've always felt like there's more out there, something beyond what I've been taught. Kale reached out, his hand brushing against hers. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of electricity shot through him, and he felt a rush of emotions, joy, fear, longing, and something else, something he couldn't quite name. It was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. What is this? He asked, his voice barely audible. It's the bond, Zenara replied, her voice soft. When two souls connect, truly connect, it creates a bond that can't be broken. It's rare, even among my people. But when it happens, it's powerful. Kale's mind raced. He had never believed in fate, in destiny. But this felt real. It felt like something he had been waiting for his entire life. What does this mean? He asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Zenara's eyes glowed brighter, and she leaned in even closer. It means we're connected, Kale. In a way that goes beyond words, beyond understanding. But it also means we're in danger. My people, they don't approve of bonds with outsiders. They see it as a betrayal, a threat to our way of life. Kale's heart sank. He had just found something incredible, something he didn't even know he was searching for. And now, it was being threatened. What do we do? He asked, his voice filled with desperation. Zenara's expression hardened, and she stood up, pulling him out of the pool. We fight, she said, her voice firm. We fight for what we found, for what we feel. But we have to be careful. If my people find out about this, they'll do everything in their power to tear us apart. Kale nodded, his resolve strengthening. He had faced countless dangers in his life, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival. This was about something greater, something worth fighting for. I'm with you, he said, his voice filled with determination. Whatever it takes. Zenara smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that made Kale's heart skip a beat. Then let's get to work, she said. We have a lot to do, and not much time. As they left the sanctuary and ventured back into the jungle, Kale couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. He had always been a loner, always searching for something he couldn't name. But now, he had found it. And he wasn't going to let it go. The escape. The jungle was alive with the sounds of the night, chirping insects, distant growls, and the rustling of leaves in the wind. Kale and Zenara moved swiftly through the undergrowth, their footsteps light and deliberate. The bond between them had grown stronger, and Kale could feel Zenara's emotions as if they were his own. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. We need to find a way off this planet, Kale whispered, his eyes scanning the shadows. If your people find out about us, they'll never let us leave. Zenara nodded, her glowing eyes focused ahead. There's a Zorathian outpost not far from here. They have ships we can use. But it's heavily guarded. Kale's heart raced at the thought. He had faced danger before, but this was different. This wasn't just about survival, it was about protecting what they had found. Do you think we can do it? He asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Zenara glanced at him, her expression softening. We have to. There's no other way. As they approached the outpost, the dense jungle gave way to a clearing. The outpost loomed ahead, a massive structure made of the same shimmering material as Zenara's sanctuary. It was surrounded by a high wall, and Kale could see guards patrolling the perimeter. This is it, Zenara said, her voice low. We need to get inside, find a ship, and get out before they realize what's happening. Kale nodded, his mind racing. Any ideas on how we're going to do that? Zanara's lips curved into a faint smile. Follow my lead. They moved closer to the outpost, staying in the shadows. Zanara's movements were fluid and precise, and Kale did his best to keep up. When they reached the wall, Zanara placed her hand on the surface, and it began to shimmer and shift, creating an opening just large enough for them to slip through. How did you do that? Kale asked, his eyes wide with amazement. I told you, Zanara replied, her voice soft. My people have a connection to this planet. We can shape it, mold it. They slipped through the opening and found themselves inside the outpost. The air was filled with the hum of machinery, and Kale could see Zorathian guards moving about, their glowing eyes scanning the area. This way, Zanara whispered, leading Kale through a series of corridors. They moved quickly, staying out of sight. But as they turned a corner, they came face to face with a group of guards. Intruders, one of the guards shouted, raising his weapon. Zanara reacted instantly, her blade appearing in her hand as she lunged at the guards. Kale followed suit, firing his blaster. The fight was intense, but Zanara's skill and speed gave them the upper hand. Within moments, the guards were down, and they were moving again. We need to hurry, Zanara said, her voice tense. They'll have alerted the rest of the outpost by now. They reached the hangar, where several ships were docked. Zanara quickly scanned the area and pointed to a sleek, black vessel. That one. It's fast, and it has the range we need. Kale nodded, and they ran to the ship. But as they approached, a voice echoed through the hangar. Zanara. What is the meaning of this? They turned to see a tall, imposing Zorathian standing at the entrance to the hangar. His glowing eyes were filled with anger, and his voice was cold and commanding. Father, Zanara said, her voice trembling. I can explain. Kale's heart sank. This was Zanara's father, the leader of the outpost. And he did not look happy. You have betrayed our people, her father said, his voice filled with rage. You have bonded with an outsider, and now you seek to flee. This is unacceptable. Zanara stepped forward, her eyes glowing with determination. I'm not betraying anyone. I'm following my heart. This bond is real, father. It's stronger than anything I've ever felt. And I won't let you take it away from me. Her father's expression softened for a moment, but then it hardened again. You leave me no choice, he said, raising his hand. Guards, seize them. Zanara grabbed Kale's hand and pulled him toward the ship. We need to go. Now. They ran to the ship, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. Zanara quickly activated the controls, and the ship's engines roared to life. As they lifted off, Kale could see the guards rushing toward them, their weapons raised. Hold on, Zanara said, her voice tense. This is going to be close. The ship shot forward, narrowly avoiding the blasts from the guards' weapons. They broke through the hangar doors and soared into the night sky, the outpost growing smaller behind them. Kale let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. We made it, he said, his voice filled with relief. Zanara's expression was grim. For now. But my father won't let us go that easily. We need to get as far away from here as possible. Kale nodded, his mind racing. They had escaped, but the danger was far from over. And as they flew into the stars, he couldn't help but wonder what lay ahead. The cosmic dance. The ship soared through the stars, its engines humming with a steady rhythm. Kale sat in the co-pilot seat, his eyes fixed on the endless expanse of space outside the viewport. The adrenaline from their escape was still coursing through his veins, but now, a sense of calm was beginning to settle in. They had made it, at least for now. Zanara's hands moved deftly over the controls, her glowing eyes focused on the navigation system. We need to find a place to lay low, she said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. My father will have alerted the Zorathian fleet by now. They'll be searching for us. Kale nodded, his mind racing. Any ideas where we can go? Zenara hesitated for a moment, then input a set of coordinates into the system. There's a hidden asteroid base not far from here. It's used by smugglers and outlaws. We should be able to find refuge there. Kale raised an eyebrow. Smugglers and outlaws? Sounds like my kind of people. Zenara glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. Let's hope they feel the same way about us. As the ship approached the asteroid base, Kale couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The base was a sprawling, chaotic structure, built into the side of a massive asteroid. Ships of all shapes and sizes were docked along its surface, and the air was filled with the hum of activity. This place is something, Kale said, his voice filled with awe. It's not exactly the most welcoming place, Zenara admitted. But it's our best chance. They docked the ship and made their way into the base. The interior was a maze of narrow corridors and dimly lit rooms, filled with the sounds of laughter, shouting, and the occasional burst of gunfire. Kale kept his hand close to his blaster, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of trouble. Zenara led him to a small, secluded room at the edge of the base. It was sparsely furnished, but it was clean and relatively quiet. We should be safe here, she said, closing the door behind them. Kale let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. So, what now? Zenara turned to him, her glowing eyes soft and filled with emotion. Now, we wait. And we plan. Kale nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. The bond between them was stronger than ever, and he could feel Zenara's emotions as if they were his own. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Zenara, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This bond, it's incredible. But it's also terrifying. I've never felt anything like this before. Zenara stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. I know, she said, her voice soft. It's the same for me. But that's what makes it so special. It's rare, even among my people. And it's something to be cherished. Kale's heart raced as she reached out, her hand brushing against his. The moment their skin touched, a jolt of electricity shot through him, and he felt a rush of emotions, joy, fear, longing, and something else, something he couldn't quite name. It was overwhelming, but also exhilarating. Zenara, he said, his voice trembling. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she replied, her voice soft. Just feel. They stood there for a moment, their eyes locked, their hearts beating in sync. Then, Zenara leaned in, her lips brushing against his. The kiss was soft and tender at first, but it quickly deepened, their emotions pouring into each other. Kale's mind was a whirlwind of sensations, and he felt as if he was being pulled into a vortex of pure emotion. When they finally pulled apart, Kale's breath was ragged, and his heart was pounding in his chest. That was incredible, he said, his voice filled with awe. Zenara smiled, her eyes glowing with warmth. It's just the beginning, she said. The bond between us is powerful, but it's also fragile. We need to protect it, nurture it. Kale nodded, his resolve strengthening. I'll do whatever it takes, he said, his voice filled with determination. I'm not going to let anything tear us apart. Zenara's smile widened, and she reached out, her hand brushing against his cheek. I know you won't, she said. And neither will I. As they sat together in the small room, the chaos of the asteroid base fading into the background, Kale couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. They had found something incredible, something worth fighting for. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. The asteroid base was a hive of activity, but in their secluded room, Kale and Zenara found a rare moment of peace. The bond between them had grown stronger, and with it, a sense of determination. They knew the Zorathian fleet would be closing in, and they needed a plan. "We can't stay here forever," Kale said, his voice low. "Sooner or later, they'll find us." Zanara nodded, her glowing eyes focused on the holographic map projected from the ship's navigation system. "We need to find a way to throw them off our trail. Something unexpected." Kale studied the map, his mind racing. "What if we head toward the edge of the galaxy? Near that collapsing star we passed on the way here. The gravitational forces are unstable, it's dangerous, but it might be enough to lose them." Zanara's eyes lit up with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "It's risky, but it could work. The Zorathian ships won't be able to handle the gravitational fluctuations like ours can." "Then it's settled," Kale said, his voice filled with resolve. "We'll head for the collapsing star and use it to our advantage." They spent the next few hours preparing the ship, making sure it was ready for the journey ahead. As they worked, the bond between them continued to grow, their emotions intertwining in a way that was both exhilarating and comforting. Kale could feel Zanara's determination, her fear, and her hope, and it only strengthened his own resolve. When they were ready, they boarded the ship and set a course for the collapsing star. The journey was tense, the silence between them filled with unspoken words and shared emotions. As they approached the star, the ship's sensors began to pick up the intense gravitational forces, and the controls became increasingly difficult to manage. "This is it," Zanara said, her voice steady but filled with tension. "Once we enter the star's gravitational field, there's no turning back." Kale nodded, his hands gripping the controls. "Let's do this." The ship plunged into the star's gravitational field, the forces pulling at it like a whirlpool. The controls shook violently, and alarms blared as the ship struggled to maintain its course. Kale's hands moved quickly, adjusting the thrusters and stabilizers to keep them on track. "They're following us," Zanara said, her eyes fixed on the scanner. 3 Zorathian ships, closing fast. Kale's heart raced, but he kept his focus. "Hold on. I've got an idea." He adjusted the ship's trajectory, using the star's gravitational pull to slingshot them around its edge. The Zorathian ships followed, but they weren't as agile. One by one, they were pulled into the star's gravitational field, their systems overwhelmed by the intense forces. "It's working," Zanara said, her voice filled with relief. "They're being pulled in." Kale's hands moved quickly, guiding the ship through the star's turbulent field. The ship shook violently, but they managed to stay on course. As they emerged on the other side, the Zorathian ships were nowhere to be seen. "We did it," Kale said, his voice filled with triumph. "We lost them." Zanara smiled, her glowing eyes filled with pride. "You were amazing." Kale's heart swelled with emotion, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. "We did it together. This bond, it's made us stronger." Zanara's smile widened, and she leaned in, her lips brushing against his. The kiss was soft and tender, a moment of pure connection. When they pulled apart, Kale felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. "What now?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. "Now," Zanara said, her eyes glowing with determination, "we explore the universe together. We've faced the impossible and come out stronger. There's nothing we can't do."